Thank you, Kabbalah. Starting again. Now we're recording. We're beginning a new series, The Life and the Teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. I assess that it will not be a short series, inasmuch as the incredible influence of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov on the Hasidic movement, but in Jewish life in general. And that's really what we want to explore, that so many of the ideas and worldview that we have, that we don't even quote that they come from the Ba'al Shem Tov anymore. They become such a part of Hasidic teachings and in general Jewish teachings that sometimes we don't really know where the sources are coming from. So we are going to delve deeply into the life of the Ba'al Shem Tov and his teachings. So before we start with the life of the Ba'al Shem Tov, we need to really understand the historical context that he was born into. When you study history, you can never isolate a person or an event from a much larger context of what came before it. So it's very, very important to establish two major events that occurred approximately 50 years before the Ba'al Shem Tov was born. He was born in 1698 in the Ukraine, in a section of the Ukraine called Podelia, where he spent most of his life. And his, as we said, his influence started from a very small area and spread to the whole world. But the two events that I'm referring to is in approximately 1648. In those days, the Ukraine switched not allegiances, but was ruled either by a greater Poland or by a greater Russia. Sometimes the Ukraine was on its own, but most of the time it was subsumed in other, I call them countries, but then things were very, very fluid, and the aristocracy ruled. There weren't set countries as we know them. There were regions and kingdoms, etc. So in 1648, as part of an inner conflict between Ukrainians and Poles, a Ukrainian leader rose, Khmelnytsky. And what happened, it was a 10-year war. And as has happened through much of Jewish history, everyone blamed the Jews. The Jews became just fodder for destruction. And although it's not mentioned that often, but as far as individual Jews who died in this 10-year war, again, the Jews had nothing to do with this war between the Poles and the Ukrainians. But as always, they were accused of being on the other side. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. Hundreds of Jewish communities were destroyed in these 10 years. Just to put a context to it, the Crusades, which were tremendously traumatic to Jewish communities, approximately 5,000 Jews died in the two Crusades. But why does it play such a huge part of Jewish history? Is because before them, for well over 1,000 years, Jews had lived very peacefully in Europe. The Crusades was a turning point. After the Crusades, Jews could never really feel at home or safe anywhere. Once the Crusades happened, then what followed in all the countries were expulsions, inquisitions, pogroms, constant. But in the number of people killed, of course, we're not minimizing 5,000 people, of course not. But in the Khmelnytsky wars, hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. This is 50 years before the birth of the Ba'al Shem Tov. So here we are approximately getting towards 80 years after the Holocaust. Of course, just a day or two ago was Holocaust Memorial Day, Remembrance Day. And we know very well, especially after October 7th, that the shadow of the Holocaust still is very, very present in not only Jewish history, but present Jewish consciousness. So here the Ba'al Shem Tov is born 50 years after these horrendous massacres that happened all over the Ukraine. So we can imagine how dispirited people were, how downtrodden people were. The second major event that happened also, really only 40 years, approximately 40 to 45 years before the Ba'al Shem Tov, was the fiasco with the false Messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi. Most people are a little bit familiar with the rise of this false Messiah in the 1660s, but many people do not know how traumatic this whole incident was. That at the height of his, call it popularity. Now remember, this is before mass media. Everything was word of mouth. And because people were so desperate for redemption, the news that a possible Messiah was present spread like wildfire through the Jewish world, and people bought into it, mostly out of just desperation. Again, there was no videos, there was no mass communication. It was just word of mouth that a Messiah had come and was going to lead Jews back to Israel. Well, because of their desperation, a majority of Jews really felt this was about to happen. And so when Shabbatai Tzvi was arrested by the Sultan of Turkey, and then given a choice of either die or convert to Islam, to the shock of the Jewish world, he converted to Islam. Despite that, the followers of Shabbatai Tzvi, most of them left him, were totally traumatized, but a not small amount held on to their belief that he still was the Messiah. This was just some passing obstacle, that he still would reveal himself and create the Messianic era. And these small groups went underground. And again, the Ba'al Shem Tov is born 45 years after this. So both of these events were incredibly traumatic for the Jewish people. And that is the atmosphere into which the Ba'al Shem Tov is born. Again, he's born in 1698. His parents were Eliezer and Sarah. And it only became clear to him later, they were part of a hidden society called the Hidden Tzaddikim. This is very, very important to the whole story of the Ba'al Shem Tov, is that at the time, there was a group of hidden tzaddikim. Now we have to clarify that we know from the Talmud and Jewish tradition the idea of 36 hidden tzaddikim in every generation. This is not the same as the hidden tzaddikim of the group that the Ba'al Shem Tov's parents were part of. It sounds the same, and in a certain way, many of them might have been the 36 hidden tzaddikim, because these were a group of people who were somewhat estranged from the Jewish religious aristocracy, because, and this is another very important context, that the Jewish people were quite divided, not politically, but according to how much Torah you knew. And so there was a class of scholars, and they were great people, very knowledgeable, very pious, but there was almost a complete disconnect between this group of scholars and the vast majority of poor Jews who had to work very, very hard under incredibly difficult situations just to maintain get the bread on the table. And so they were quite sincere and pious Jews, but they were in a certain way very unlearned and we'll call it unsophisticated in their Judaism. And so this group of hidden tzaddikim, they, in a very hidden way, they did not announce anything. There was no big news about them, but they took upon themselves, in a certain way, you could call them like a kiruv movement, where they took upon themselves the task of reaching out and trying to educate and draw close Jews who, for reasons of not their own choosing, just did not have educations. Many of them had to work as children and didn't even have the luxury of getting beyond a few years of learning Hebrew and learning the basics of Jewish life. When the Ba'al Shem Tov was 5 years old, his father passed away. And this is a very, very famous teaching within the Hasidic movement of his last words to the Ba'al Shem Tov. And the two that are quoted most is he knew, his father Eliezer knew he was dying, and he told the Ba'al Shem Tov that I am not going to be able to raise you, so I want to give you over the two most important things. And that is not to be afraid of anyone or anything other than God. And the here fear means awe of, respect, and love of God. And the second was to love every Jew with your whole heart and soul and might. Just like we say of loving God, he gave over to his young son. By the way, the Ba'al Shem Tov's name was Yisrael. Yisrael ben Eliezer. His mother's name was Sarah. And there are other less quoted ideas that he gave over to the Ba'al Shem Tov. One was to be constantly connected to God, to always be thinking about God, no matter what. That's your main connection in life, is to be connected to God, and that you should keep your ways hidden. You should be modest and hidden. Remember, his father and mother were part of this hidden society. So his father passes away. The Ba'al Shem Tov is 5 years old. His mother passed away a year later. So at the age of 6, he was left an orphan. The town where he grew up, there were many orphans. And so the town, in a certain way, took responsibility for raising him. And so for 2 years, he was put up and fed, sent to cheder. And from the beginning, it was clear that he was special. He took to learning very, very quickly. And also he was quite independent. And he was known to disappear for hours or sometimes even days at a time. He would go to the forest and he would commune with God. That's what his father taught him, to be in constant contact with God. So the story goes that when he's 8 years old, one day he just could not handle being in cheder. He just didn't like the atmosphere. And he went out to the forest. And while he was in the forest, he saw a Jew with talis and tefillin davening. And the Ba'al Shem Tov picked up on a very, very holy aura around this person. And so when he finished davening, he noticed that this little boy is watching him. And so he says to him, "Aren't you afraid to be out in the forest by yourself?" And he said, "No, I'm not afraid. My father taught me that I should be afraid of no one or nothing other than God." And so this individual, his name was Shlomo Zalman, he put one and one together and realized this is the son of Eliezer, who was part of his group. Shlomo Zalman was part of the hidden tzaddikim, and he put it out to him directly. He said, "Would you like to come with me? You can come with me and I'll teach you." And the Ba'al Shem Tov agreed, and he went with Shlomo Zalman. He stayed with Shlomo Zalman for 3 to 4 years. Shlomo Zalman was a wanderer. He wandered from place to place. And as part of his agenda of the hidden tzaddikim, no one knew what a great person was, but he went from town to town and he befriended people. And he taught people in a very modest way. And he reached out to them and he shared their concerns. And he taught the Ba'al Shem Tov. He began to reveal to the Ba'al Shem Tov not only the revealed parts of the Torah, but the more hidden parts of the Torah as well. The Ba'al Shem Tov picked up on this very, very quickly. After these 3 or 4 years, Shlomo Zalman said to the Ba'al Shem Tov, "I want to take you to someone else who will teach you even more than me." And this was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was also one of the hidden tzaddikim, and he posed as a common laborer. No one had any idea how knowledgeable he was. He did all kinds of menial tasks, and everyone looked at him like that. But he raised the Ba'al Shem Tov for another 3 or 4 years, and began teaching him the deeper aspects of Torah, as well, of course, as the revealed Torah. So this brings the Ba'al Shem Tov to almost 16 years old. He is bar mitzvahed in the under the care of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir then reveals to him the whole existence of the hidden tzaddikim, and that his parents were part of this group as well. But the Ba'al Shem didn't learn about this till he was around bar mitzvah time. And so at that point, the Ba'al Shem Tov is made part of this, this hidden group of tzaddikim. Excuse me. At age 16, I didn't mention, the Ba'al Shem Tov is born on Chai Elul, the 18th day of Elul, meaning 12 days before Rosh Hashanah. This date, as we'll see, plays a very, very important part in the life of the Ba'al Shem Tov. So when the Ba'al Shem Tov is 16 years old, he's now been part of these hidden tzaddikim. He is learning all of the time. He's truly a great scholar, and he's already very attuned to the whole Kabbalistic tradition. And plus, from the time he was 5 or 6 years old, he forged his own relationship with God. We call it now hit bodedut. This is where Rebbe Nachman really gets the whole idea of hit bodedut. Was from his great-grandfather, the Ba'al Shem Tov. And so when the Ba'al Shem Tov is 16, we have to understand what a level he was on at this point. At age 16, on his birthday, Chai Elul, Eliyahu and Navi appears to him. He had actually been in the presence of Eliyahu and Navi a number of times as part of this hidden group. But this time, Eliyahu Navi comes to the Ba'al Shem Tov and tells him, I am now going to be your teacher. I should mention here, I'm trying in one evening to go through the whole life of the Ba'al Shem Tov. So we have the picture. Obviously, we're going to go back on many of these ideas. We're not even touching really on the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov tonight. Tonight is an introduction just to his life and the context in how he was raised and in what context of history he comes on the scene. So at age 16, Eliyahu Navi becomes his teacher for 10 years. For 10 years, Eliyahu Navi comes to the Ba'al Shem Tov and learns with him. And part of his learning process, and this we will go back upon, is he will send the Ba'al Shem Tov to different places to learn certain lessons. It's very, very fascinating because when we delve into the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov, in certain instances, we will recall the actual stories or incidences where the Ba'al Shem Tov learned how to be the way he was and how to teach what he taught. That is not for tonight. You can imagine for 10 years, Eliyahu Navi is teaching the Ba'al Shem Tov. As part of his growing process, he becomes aware of more of the history of this group of the hidden tzaddikim. They had been in existence for, I don't know the exact number of years, but there were 3 Ba'al Shems before the Ba'al Shem Tov, Yisrael Ba'al Shem Tov. The first one was Eliyahu Shem Tov, The second one was Yoel Shem Tov. And the third was Adam Shem Tov. And the fourth was Yisrael, our Ba'al Shem Tov. Shem Tov simply means the good name. Ba'al means the master of the good name. And before the Ba'al Shem Tov, the term Ba'al Shem referred to someone who was very, very Kabbalistically oriented and was a healer, could heal not just spiritually and psychologically, but also physically. And this entailed a tremendous knowledge of herbs and the natural world. So the term Ba'al Shem comes before the Ba'al Shem Tov. And so these were the four: Eliyahu, Yoel, Adam, and the Ba'al Shem Tov. The leader before the Ba'al Shem Tov was Adam Shem Tov, and he was from the Ukraine. And for various reasons, he actually moved very far away and lived near Vienna, which in those days was quite a distance. But it wasn't just in the Ukraine where the Hin Tzaddikim were. So Adam Shem Tov had a manuscript, a very, very secretive manuscript, which had many, many hidden teachings. And at one point, he told his son that his days were coming to an end. And he knew already, either prophetically or from being in contact with the other Hin Tzaddikim in the Ukraine, that our Yisrael Ba'al Shem Tov was destined to become the leader. But it wasn't time yet. And so he sent his son to befriend the Ba'al Shem Tov and to learn with him. And so I'm telling the story now because it's important to the bigger picture, is that his son went and he found where the Ba'al Shem Tov was. And the Ba'al Shem Tov, like his father said, was totally hidden. No one had any idea what level he was on. And when he was around 18, the son of Adam Ba'al Shem Tov finds him. And it's part of a longer story, but begins learning with him. Perhaps we'll get back to the whole story. Starts learning with him. It is at that point, the Ba'al Shem Tov is, I believe, 20 years old, and he gets married. And unfortunately, his first wife was Chava. She died very shortly after they got married, which was obviously something very traumatic for the Ba'al Shem Tov. And at the same time, when he was learning with the son of Adam Shem Tov, they were learning this manuscript, and they reached a very, very, very high level. And they thought they would try to even go higher and higher. They prepared themselves. And unfortunately, what happened in the process, the son of Adam Shem Tov died because in their various, what are called elevations of soul, he just lost connection with this world, and he died. And according to tradition, the Ba'al Shem Tov took the manuscript and hid it away, and no one knows actually where it is to this day. You just give me a second here. Okay, now, during this period, the Ba'al Shem Tov becomes more and more important part of this group of the hidden tzaddikim. And the Ba'al Shem Tov started giving, we'll call it eitzot, advice to the group of the tzaddikim. And even though he was by far the youngest, they already sensed what a tremendous soul he was. And so little by little, he began giving advice about how to succeed, we'll call it in their kiruv, in their drawing what, again, in literature are called the simple Jews, to help educate them, especially children. The Ba'al Shem Tov had a very, very warm part in his heart, but also part of his agenda was we have to teach the children. We have to get to the children while they're young. And so the Ba'al Shem was very instrumental in having the group of hidden tzaddikim going from village to village, helping set up, in Hebrew, gan yeladim, chedarim, little yeshivas for young children. And not only to teach them, but to infuse them with enthusiasm, with excitement for being Jewish. We have to constantly remember how downtrodden the Jewish people were, how poor, and in general, how uneducated they were, which didn't make them any less loyal to their Judaism. And this is one of the teachings we will return to, that Eliyahu Navi wants the Ba'al Shem Tov to learn how important and how holy and how valuable every Jew is, and it doesn't matter how much they know. And this is one of the most important things that Eliyahu Navi teaches the Ba'al Shem Tov, to do exactly what his father said, to love every Jew with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole might. So the Ba'al Shem Tov is rising in authority in this group of tzaddikim, to the point where he's made one of the three main leaders. And so, just to return, Eliyahu Navi is teaching him till he's 26. His first wife dies, and it's a very, very important part of the story. And I'm just looking at the time, we'll have to get back to it, but he marries again. He marries into actually a very, very educated, important family in the city of Kitov. And it happens because, and now I'm going to add another important part. This whole time, the Ba'al Shem Tov is very, very hidden. But what happens is he goes from place to place, and inevitably, because he wants to help people, he is on the slide, he's healing people, he's teaching people how to daven. He'll be in a place, and he'll be in, let's say, in the Beit Knesset at night when he thinks no one is there. And so someone is going to pass by the Beit Knesset, and they see this light emanating from the Ba'al Shem Tov that he hides during the day. And so what happens is the Ba'al Shem Tov is starting to be known by individuals, and sometimes he'll stay in a place for a while, but as soon as he's getting too known, he moves. He moves. And we have to say, we'll go back over the story, but again, his new wife, her name was Hannah, from a very, very important family, agrees to marry him. He reveals to her who he is and what his agenda is. And in truth, how hard their life is going to be, because he comes off as just a manual laborer, and through his brother-in-law's shock, she agrees to marry him. He does his best to talk his sister out of it. He thinks the Ba'al Shem Tov is an ignoramus. And this will be part of the story that we will return to. So with his wife, they go from place to place, and she is an incredible tzaddikus. She, it reminds me very much of Rachel, who marries Rabbi Akiva. Rachel was the daughter of the richest man in Israel at the time. And when she agrees to marry Rabbi Akiva, who is a simple shepherd and he didn't know an aleph from a bet, so her father disowned her. And so for approximately 24 years, Rabbi Akiva and his wife lived in dire poverty. But she loved and believed in her husband and shared everything they went through. So Chana, the wife of the Ba'al Shem Tov, reminds me very much of Rachel. Many, many stories about Rachel and Rabbi Akiva. So they're going from place to place, and in certain times, the Ba'al Shem Tov will stay in a place, and because he couldn't daven with the regular minions, because his type of davening was so ecstatic. So in many places, he started his own minyan. And again, word would get out, and then he would move on. When he turns 26, a major event happens on his birthday. Again, Chai Elo. On his birthday, his next spiritual teacher reveals himself to him. And this is Achia Hashiloni. Who is Achia Hashiloni? He is in the Tanakh. He's in the book of Malachim. He was the teacher of Eliyahu Navi. So here it's significant because from age 16 to 26, the Ba'al Shem Tov's major teacher is Eliyahu Navi. Now, the teacher of Eliyahu Navi is going to become the teacher of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And so at age 26, Achia Hashiloni reveals himself and learns with him also for 10 years. And they begin with Bereshit bara Elokim et hashmayim ve'et haaretz. And 10 years later, on his 36th birthday, they finish the last verse in the Torah. They go through verse by verse and learn it in its complete depths. But just like Eliyahu Navi, Achia Shiloni will send the Ba'al Shem Tov out to learn different lessons or to do different tasks. And this continues for 10 years. The whole time, he and his wife are moving from place to place. They have 2 children. They have a son and a daughter. His son is Tzvi, and his daughter is Udal. We will return to these children in the history of the Ba'al Shem Tov. But again, because I want to kind of get through the whole picture in one night, on his 36th birthday, Achia Shiloni comes to the Ba'al Shem Tov and says it is now time for you to reveal yourself. This could remind us very, very much of after approximately 20 years of Eliyahu Navi learning with the Arizal. He comes to the Arizal and says, you now need to go to Tzfat, and it's not so much reveal yourself, but you need to begin teaching. The Arizal did not want to do this, and Eliyahu Navi said, in essence, you only have to teach one person, Rabbi Chaim Vital. You will teach him, and he will reveal your teachings to the world. And the Arizal was convinced, and he moved to Tzfat for 2.5 years. Rabbi Chaim Vital convinced the Arizal to take on approximately 20 to 25 students. That's all the Arizal ever had. Though when he went to Tzfat, everyone saw his greatness. That was revealed. Everyone in Tzfat understood who the Arizal was, but he really only had around 25 students and really only one primary student. So here, Achia Shiloni tells the Ba'al Shem Tov, it's time for you to reveal yourself. It took the Ba'al Shem Tov over 3 months of conflict because he wanted to stay hidden. He felt that was his role, and especially as part of this society. But Achia Shiloni convinced him that this was his destiny, that all of his teaching and Eliyahu Navi's teaching and all of the efforts of the hidden tzaddikim was for him to now reveal these teachings in the world. This, of course, is a landmark in Jewish history. Is the Ba'al Shem Tov is now going to reveal everything that was taught to him and really spread the teachings to the entire world. And after 3 months, the Ba'al Shem Tov agrees that he will have to be revealed. And what happens is, I'll just tell this incident. At this point, the Ba'al Shem Tov and his wife moved back to Kitov. If you remember, his wife was from Kitov, and his brother, who was one of the geniuses, one of the Talmidei Chachamim of that whole area, actually they went back around 2 or 3 years before that, and even though he was terribly embarrassed about his brother-in-law, he arranged to rent out an inn, and he and his wife ran this inn. His wife did most of the work, but the Ba'al Shem Tov was an accomplished shochet, and so he would prepare the meat for the guests, and he would prepare the beds, and he'd clean up. Again, no one knew who he was. So what happened, many, many, many stories, but because all these years he had been revealed to many, many, many people. I didn't mention this before, but any person who saw and understood who he was, the Ba'al Shem made them promise not to tell anyone. And so what happened was, right when the Ba'al Shem Tov was getting ready to reveal himself, one of the people who had found out what a great soul the Ba'al Shem Tov was talking to a group of these great tzaddikim. And he mentioned that no one knows this, but this person that we treat like an ignoramus, I'm telling you, he is a great soul. And one of the other people say, you experienced that also? I also did. And like everyone there was like, I didn't know anyone knew about who he really was. He made me not tell anyone. And so they realized, oh my gosh, we missed this the whole time. And at that point, they revealed to the Baal Shem's brother-in-law as well. And what happened is that they said, we have to go to the Ba'al Shem Tov and we have to acknowledge who he is. Now, they don't know about this whole thing of Achia Shiloni and that it's time for the Ba'al Shem to reveal himself. So these two incidences kind of come together. And they come to the Ba'al Shem Tov and they sit under a tree, and the Ba'al Shem Tov starts openly to teach them. And of course, this is the turning point. This is the turning point. Part of this also is he is officially made the leader of the hidden tzaddikim. So all of this is like coming together. I took a long time to get to his 36th birthday, but what happens after this is what we are going to explore in great depth is, what did he start teaching? What were the messages the Ba'al Shem Tov was giving over? And so this is really what we will be spending our time with. We will reveal some of the stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. There are many, many, many stories. There's a saying that says like this. I'm not sure who the source is. I'll try to find out. But it's a well-known saying that says, if you believe all of the stories that are told about the Ba'al Shem Tov, you're an idiot. But if you don't believe them, you're a fool. So what does this mean? It's one of those paradoxical statements. What it means is it's not 100% clear if every single one of the stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov happened the way that they were finally written down. But what it is saying is anyone who doesn't accept that the Ba'al Shem Tov was on a level that many or maybe even all of these stories could be true or were true, then you don't understand the Ba'al Shem Tov and you're a fool. So that's an important idea. The Ba'al Shem Tov lives to be 62 years old. That means for approximately 26 years, he was revealed. There is a story that's told that, and we're going to go into the reincarnations of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Another, who is this? What souls make up the soul that we call Yisrael Ba'al Shem Tov? That we will get into. But there's a story that when the soul of the Ba'al Shem Tov was in heaven, and he was told, in a sense, what he was coming in the world to do, he said, I won't come into the world unless I have 60 students or 60 warriors around me. This is based on a verse in Shir HaShirim of Shlomo HaMelech. We had 60 warriors surrounding him. And so in his lifetime, he had a tremendous impact, but it was mostly on the individuals who then carried on his teachings. He became known far and wide as a miracle worker, as a healer, as a great soul. But most of his influence came through, we're going to say these 60, through his close students who then were so dedicated to the Ba'al Shem Tov and his teachings that they spread these teachings until they spread like wildfire through all of the Jewish world, really. I mean, specifically Europe and Russia and the Ukraine, that within a short amount of time, Chassidut had spread everywhere, and its influence, of course, is so prevalent today. And I would say, I'm not comparing numbers. There are many groups of Hasidim that have hundreds of thousands of Ger Hasidim, Breslovers, Bells, and many, many other groups, of course, Chabad, but probably the group that is most instrumental in spreading the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov is Chabad. Chabad is very, very attached to the source of the teachings coming from the Ba'al Shem Tov. In many, many Chassidus, you don't see the Ba'al Shem Tov even mentioned that often, because his teachings became so, we'll even call them mainstream, that people don't even mention the Ba'al Shem Tov said this or said that, or these teachings come from the Ba'al Shem Tov. In many circles of Chabad, they're still very, very careful. Rabbi Ginsburg is very careful to quote directly from the Ba'al Shem Tov. So the Ba'al Shem Tov lived for 26 years after his revelation. And we will, of course, get to the teachings and what happened, including the pushback that during his lifetime, the whole Hasidic movement that was put in cherem, and there was a ban against being part of the Hasidic movement. This had an effect for many, many years, close to 100 years or more. There was tremendous tension between the followers of the Hasidic movement and those that did not follow the Hasidic movement. Little by little, the incredible tension and really opposition started to fade. In a certain way, philosophically, it still exists, but to a far less degree now. And in most cases, it's negligible. So the way I want to end this class is I just want to show everyone some of the sources. This is not all of the sources, but some of the sources that I'll be using. So I'm not doing this in any particular order. So the first one is called The Light and Fire of the Ba'al Shem Tov from Yitzchak Buxbaum. This is the book. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. It is a phenomenal book, and it's all sourced. Everything is sourced where it came from, previous books that it came from. So anyone who wants to follow this series and really delve into this, this would be a great purchase. Again, The Light and Fire of the Ba'al Shem Tov by Yitzchak Buxbaum. Again, this is in no order. This book just came out, and I'm very, very proud. It's actually one of my students, one of my friends. His name is Rabbi Micha Hyman, and he just came out with a book. It's called Sharei Ba'al Shem Tov. And what he did in very simple Hebrew is he took from all the previous teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov that appear in different books, and he organizes them according to subject. What the Ba'al Shem Tov said about different things, because all the previous books are just a record of what he said. There's no organization per se. So this book I will be quoting a lot. And again, he quotes all of the sources. Here is one of my books, Return Again. If anyone looks at the end, in like 3 or 4 pages, I tell the soul history of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Very, very fascinating. We will get to this. Return Again, The Dynamics of Reincarnation, by yours truly. This is a very important one. This is called Ba'al Shem Tov Ala Torah. This is a book that someone took all of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov and organized it according to Parsha. So you can start from Genesis and go through the whole Torah, Parsha by Parsha, with quotes, teachings from the Ba'al Shem Tov on each Parsha. As I said, the original teachings that came down, I have to mention, the Ba'al Shem Tov didn't write anything himself. He left no record of his teachings. It was left for his students to do. And he really only gave, in his life, gave permission to one person to write down his teachings. But it took 20 years for those teachings to come out. So this is also a great resource. This is a very important one. This is from Rav Ginsburg. Rabbi Ginsburg this is a picture of the Beit Knesset of the Ba'al Shem Tov in Mezhebush. It still exists, and I had the great privilege to be there one time. I was with Rabbi Shlomo Katz and Rabbi Chaim Kramer on this one trip to the Beit Knesset of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Rav Ginsburg gave a 3-day seminar in Mezhebush about the Ba'al Shem Tov. It's a series of 3 books, and I will be using that also as a source. This is called Or Yisrael, the Light of Yisrael. And this is one of the most important. It's called Keter Shem Tov, the crown of a good name. And this was one of the primary sources of all of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Now there's 2 other books. One is called Shivchei Habesht, the praises of the Ba'al Shem Tov. This came out approximately 60 years after the Ba'al Shem Tov passed away. But again, they're all based on primary sources. And all the books that I'm showing you are going to be based on these original books. This is called In Praise of the Ba'al Shem Tov. It's basically not his teachings, the stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov, mostly the miraculous stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And the other one is called Toldot Yaakov Yitzchak. And this was the book that was put out 20 years after the passing of the Ba'al Shem Tov by one of the primary students of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And that also is included in everything else that we've included. So before I end, I do want to say that usually people ask in the chats, what is that picture behind you? So this picture here is actually my wife's artwork. And on the bottom, this is the Moshav. It's you know what, I'm going to show it closer. Maybe you can see it better here. At the bottom is the Moshav and the Ben Shemen forest and the Mediterranean behind it. And this is the idea of what's called Kfitzat Haderech, which is called the transcending time. And there are many, many famous stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. This is, symbolically, the Ba'al Shem Tov, he would go with his Talmidim in his carriage, and they would be transported hundreds of miles in a matter of minutes or hours in some kind of time skipping, time dilation. And so this is my wife's drawing of the Ba'al Shem Tov doing Fitzat the Derech. And then we took that, and this is the cover of one of my music CDs called Merkava. You can see it's the same idea, but here we just change it. Here's the Moshav, there's the forest, and there's the Mediterranean, just like our house. And here we see sunset every night. And there's the Ba'al Shem Tov taking us on his Merkava. Instead of calling it what we call it, a chariot in Hebrew, an agalah, this is a Merkava, this is a chariot, the idea of the workings of the chariot. So thank you all for attending, and we will be continuing our series, and hopefully we got off to a good start, and everyone is invited to continue to watch.